In a world where DEI feels lost and inclusion is becoming a bad word, we are having real conversations about leadership through the lenses of diverse voices.
As generational and neurodiversity advocates, we are disrupting this sense of dissonance and navigating a path towards personal empowerment, conscious leadership, and organizational success.
By leveraging evidence-based practices rooted in neuroscience, we can nurture a flourishing workplace culture where every diversity thrives.
We are your hosts, Sherri Dockree
and Nicki Straza.
Welcome to the Dissonance Disrupted podcast.
Last time on Dissonance Disrupted, Nicki and Sherri talked about what well-being means to them, how to balance the responsibility of well-being between organizations, leaders, and team members, and what creates friction around well-being at work. As always, their discussions bring the lenses of generational and neurodiversity into focus. And now, part 2 of our discussion on well-being at work. Let's continue the conversation. Sherri, you left off talking about how important it is to understand why neurodiversity inclusion is actually valuable for everyone. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I kind of find that kind of a weird dichotomy that we specialize in a particular area. I mean, obviously we certainly have the ability to cross over those, but we specialize in an area, and yet our message, I think, quite often is that it's less about just that group of people, and it's more about the fact that if you can absorb pieces of this perspective, it will actually help us with every human.
Yeah.
Right? The tricks that we use for someone who's neurodivergent to be more effective with things like executive function is actually a tool that could be used for anyone and everyone. And so I think it fits in the same way.
Well, and I think it opens the path for clarity for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, there's a comic that, you know, it has a wheelchair ramp and it has a set of stairs. And somebody is working so hard to clear the snow off of the set of stairs. And the comment underneath the comic is, when you clear the ramp, everyone can get up.
Yeah.
And I think this is the sad part, is we make a lot of assumptions, but the genius is in the room. And these beautiful diversities in our workforce are the keys to innovation, just seeing it in a different way, just seeing something we've missed, just seeing in a different perspective, to meeting the needs of more people. Like, our ability to have diverse thought that is safe and protected and explored now becomes a leverage point for our genius collectively and as an organization. And I think we know that in our head. And then when the rubber meets the road, my need to be right overcomes my need to be good. And then, well, we skedaddle on to the urgent instead of the important.
Yeah. And I think it's easy, you know, when you say that, it's easy to fall back into the default. And especially because, and, you know, maybe our generation is kind of the last one that will see it this way. I don't know. But it is easy to fall into the default of like, well, when we were kids growing up. Now that I say that, though, it's impossible for us to be the last generation to say this. But I do think that, you know, Gen Xers and Alpha will have more capacity to try to take, you know, many perspectives into consideration. But then, you know, you also think, so what will they lose that we have in taking that approach? And I think that there's a danger in that, in considering that is the only right path.
Yeah.
But when we are able to add those layers, so, you know, we think about just the simple layer of trust and that safety in the workplace. When we think about the layers that maybe then go on top of that, and we think, well, what comes next? We feel safe and secure in our job. So what comes out of that? Well, then I'm more likely to be more open, more willing to make mistakes. And I'm going to test that for a period of time. And who knows what that time is going to be? Because for me, it might be a short period of time before I'm willing to test the next level and the next level. You might take a little bit longer, or maybe you'll be even faster than me. Right. So I think that that also begs the awareness around, even in the changes, even in those transitions, an entire organization isn't going to move at once. Right. And so again, another layer of complexity that we add in. And so how do we, I don't know. How do we allow ourselves to be able to continually come back and check back in and reassess or reconsider? Because I think that even once we've done the work, right? We're like, okay, we're on the path, but how do we keep coming back to that in a way that is not just performative?
Well, and I think you've hit the nail on the head because it's actually a way of being, not a performance. This isn't a box we check. This is a way of being. And it's kind of like a salmon swimming upstream. The moment they stop swimming, they're going backwards.
Yeah.
Workplace culture and protecting well-being requires that attendance, requires that constant awareness and both permission to evolve and evaluation and check-in, right? The feedback loops, as it were. And I think when we think about well-being, I mean, even for myself, as I've gone through the stages of life, my own needs have shifted,
Mhm.
right? I'm in a point now where my children are adults. They don't need me to put their pants on, thank God. And, they know how to feed themselves. They have their own money. They do their things. I have a lot more space and a lot more time to execute self-care, for example. So I could probably carry a lot more stress at work than I might have 10 years ago when my kids were teenagers and struggling with depression or struggling with this, just on a bandwidth issue. Well-being isn't a static thing. It's an it's a day-to-day. I mean, one text could send us from being in a great space to being in a horrific space.
Mhm.
One phone call. And the humanity of the work that we're trying to do is holding space for that reality of well-being is us in this present moment. What do you need? What do I need? The next moment that we check in, it might be entirely different. And can we continue that conversation? Can we suspend our assumptions? Can we still listen with open heart and open ears and mind to what you have to say if it's not what I want to hear? And I think that's the hard part of it, right? Because we'd like to do this work once, put it on a file, put it on a chart, move back and circle. But the moment we do that, it becomes performative and it becomes inauthentic. And then we're now participating in the vicious cycle, not the victorious one.
Yeah.
And that's why I love to circle well-being back to the small things, because the truth of the matter is our organizations aren't going to be perfect. They are fraught with humans. And so getting to a place of perfect safety doesn't exist. But what does it look like for me as a leader to, in this moment, see you and to navigate not from autopilot, but from conscious leadership, as you so wisely say so often? And what does it look like to be present in this moment of well-being? And, when I think about what's possible when we care for well-being imperfectly, it really lights me up, because even an imperfect effort would be miles of improvement.
Miles, miles. There was something that you said earlier, and I feel like we can't not come back to this because you're around the edges of it right now. And that is, how do we repair those relationships, right? Because we have those moments. We have differences of opinions. We have the tension in our different values. And sometimes we're going to make decisions or take actions that ultimately others are going to absolutely disagree with. And I do think that this is an important piece of the conversation, because I think what I recognize, and this is one of the, I won't call it genius because it's different than that. I'm going to call it one of the deepest pieces of humanity about people who are neurodiverse is that we quite often, after something has occurred, if it's repaired, if the attempt is made to repair, we forget. And I don't mean that in like that we forget. I mean that as in we can let it go. But if there is not an attempt to resolve, right? If there isn't at least acknowledgement, and I think this is driven a little by, this very social justice side of things, but also our now and not now perspective of time. If we've disagreed and then we've made an attempt to resolve in a short period of time, that's history. It's out of here. And the ability to move on and beyond those. But when it isn't, when there isn't that attempt to resolve, when there isn't that acknowledgement and the accountability of why this didn't feel good or caused some issues, when it doesn't, it's the complete opposite. It's something that you will find the stacking on of, and then this happened, and then this happened. And there's this very deep personalization that occurs in a neurodivergent mind, as well as rumination. And so those can be the kiss of death for a relationship, and quite often are the kiss of death in all kinds of relationships. But in the workplace, I think that we want to look for the opportunity to say, okay, not quite sure what I just did there, but somehow it all feels not okay, or it feels icky. And I'm okay with having a conversation about this, or I want to know. I may not want to know, but I need to know what was not okay about that situation and make an attempt for resolution. I feel as though that's a consistent thing for most people who might identify as neurodivergent, but I also recognize that that may not necessarily be the same across every generation. And so that's a really interesting sort of conversation.
Well, and I think we could take this whole conversation into a whole nother episode
And we shall.
around vulnerability.
Mhm.
Because at the core, in order to have that conversation, there has to be self-awareness and vulnerability. That willingness to grapple with that fear of exposure, that risk, that, and fear of embarrassment, whatever it might be, risk of embarrassment, right? And well, to older generations, vulnerability was considered weakness and a threat.
Mhm.
And it was a threat to them. And that is why they're protective and maybe passive aggressive and maybe some of these other things that happens when you stuff and you brood, right? But that's not their fault. That behavior had dire consequences and it meant their livelihood. So I understand why they made their choices and why they built those habits. And as we nurture and learn more in neuroscience and learn more in neurodiversity and learn more about how the brain works and learn more about the threat response and the safety response, we are beginning to see the role that the circle back, the vulnerability, the acknowledgement, the being seen has. And we're having to learn a new set of skills, right? And so, yeah, generationally, that has a real impact. I mean, I have witnessed conversations and conflicts where the Gen Zs did a better job of demonstrating emotional intelligence, acknowledgement, validation, and awareness than the older generations they were arguing with. That's just real. And why we need each other.
Mhm.
And why having these conversations and disrupting the dissonance actually matters, because if we avoid it and sweep it under the rug, we begin to tolerate a dysfunctional behavior. But when we can bring it out in the open without shame, without blame, with true ownership, and make connecting or protecting connection, making the relationship the most valuable piece of this, my goodness, that becomes a powerhouse.
Mhm.
and we can transform things. And I think there's a lot of grace that like, we're not going to do that right.
Yeah, we're gonna
Maybe
make mistakes.
if we're lucky, we got that 80 or maybe 90% of the time. So let's just normalize that we're not going to get it right. We're going to normalize the acknowledgement. We're going to normalize the circle back, the repentance, the commitment to growing. And I've heard it from Gen Zs often. They don't need perfection. They just need effort. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's true across the board. And I think if we're all honest, that would make a world of difference. And we're not good at that.
Mhm.
So, you know, when we talk about well-being in the workplace, it's a work in progress. Our teams are worth the effort. You, the leader, I, the leader. We are worth the effort of that work because when we take care of each other, we also take care of business.
Yeah. It's funny, I think about, a blue sky is beautiful, of course, but how much more in awe are we of a rainbow, right?
Which requires some sun and some clouds
And some
and some
rain.
rain.
Absolutely. And I think when we're able to reflect back, oh, that's kind of funny because that's kind of what that is.
But
Ah, oh, punny me. When we're able to reflect back, though, on those mistakes safely for even ourselves, when we can model that behavior, and I do think that this is where there's an opportunity as leaders, is when we can reflect back that awareness of how we're going to make mistakes, or maybe even we don't know how we're going to make mistakes, but that we are going to make mistakes to our teams, and we acknowledge that up front. I really feel like that's a powerful way of saying, I may not always respond the right way or the way that I'd like to, or maybe my brain's not in it at the moment because it's sidelined by some stressors that are coming in from all sides. But I want to be committed to this. And so even when we fall off the track, the nice thing is that we aren't actually trains, right? Can get back on the track. It's not a full derailment, or at least hopefully it's not. And so there is opportunity for us to consider, how do we get back on the track? And I do recognize that, again, neurodiverse population, the concept of RSD, or, rejection sensitive dysphoria, is a huge issue when it comes to these kinds of things. And I think that when we have some of these nuggets of information of understanding what that is, so criticism, failure, even self-judgment can cause a massive emotional shift in someone who's neurodiverse. And that's something that is very much across the board, but how it shows up is
Yeah.
going to be a little different, right? So when we see that, and maybe that's totally different from one generation to the next generation, from one other kind of diversity to another, I think we also need to find ways to learn how to say, help me understand what you just experienced. Help me understand what the behavior was I just saw. So if we're able to say up front, I recognize that I'm going to make mistakes and that I am going to miss the mark. And sometimes there's going to be things that go sideways. But I also, as a leader, need to be able to ask my team, or even as a colleague, I need to be able to ask others on my team, I felt the shift, or I saw the shift that happened, whether it was behavior or language or body language. I saw it, and I want to give you space to process that and come back to me, or share with me now, and create that openness to, I can see that I've misstepped
Yeah.
and I want to understand. And then, of course, the challenge, it's a bit like the tennis match back and forth, because now that person that's being asked, I can see that I've misstepped. What was that behavior that I just saw? Tell me what happened there for you so that I understand better. That person that's been asked that question also now has to have that emotional intelligence to be able to say, I don't think I should tell you right now in this moment because I'm not yet regulating my emotions about it. Or, you know what, that's a great question, and I'm not sure I know just yet. I just know that that was a visceral response. And so I need to think about that. Or this conflicted with this value for me. And so I felt that response because of that. Those I think are really important ways to be able to have some conversations. And that's
Yeah.
tough. Like that's not just one person who has to display that skill. It's I have to display this skill and then you have to show me that skill and then I have to show you this skill back. And there's a lot of room for error back and
Oh, yes.
forth.
Well, and I think that's why we like to avoid this work
Mhm.
and why wellness at work is in peril. And is, the burnout rates and the disengagement rates are real and we can fix it, but it's going to cost us something as leaders. It's going to cost us pace. It's going to cost us ego. It's going to cost us time. And yet, that investment, that willingness to lay down our ego, to lean in and to listen and to hear what is being said can transform a relationship. And, you know, what a gift it is to have a leader who sees you, who hears you and values you, and imperfectly works to support you to the best of their ability. That's why we build trust so that there's a cushion in the bank account for when the flat tire happens.
I love that analogy.
Whether we were the cause of the flat tire
Yeah.
or however life happens, when we've made the deposits into the trust account, the currency has a positive balance. There's room for those moments where the withdrawal does and will happen. And I love your point about acknowledgement. If this happened between friends of mine the other night, it's very dangerous to get two Dutchmen in the room together because we like to argue. But I let a conversation get out of hand and shut out other people in the conversation and I stopped listening. And as I had a gift of a person who was willing to help me see how I was being experienced, reflect that back to me in love, I was able to circle back and make those necessary apologies and to correct that and to say, oh man, like I didn't handle that well. And that person was like, thank you for acknowledging that.
Mhm. And that's interesting because when you say, it's worth the investment up front, but what's interesting about that is that is also an investment because that person is able to go, wow, I mattered enough that this person came back to me. And now also I respect you more because you had the cojones to own up to it. And so it is one of those things that I think we often miss is that actually this set of skills in itself is a continual set of investments.
Yes.
It's not just that initial investment beforehand. It is continual investment and the growth and the impact, as you've said, is truly more than just the sum of the parts because we're not only just creating these environments where the relationships are stronger, healthier. But we're also creating an organization that is stronger, healthier, which also means that how we can do business is stronger and healthier. And I love that we're able to have this sort of high level conversation about well-being because I think that there's so many other little elements. And let me rephrase that because they're not little elements, but there are so many sub elements. Let's call them that. Sub elements that there's an opportunity for us to talk about. But from that high level, understanding why does it matter? Why do we need to have these conversations? Well, there's a lot of reasons. And so I think for leaders who are struggling with this, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about clients that I've been working with. And I think a lot of them are starting to see and recognize, or maybe even came with this recognition that wellness is worth it. I want to address one other thing that I think is really important because this kind of flies in the face of everything we've talked about. Quite often, what I get when I have a client that reaches out or we have a session in particular, one of the things that's coming up is actually conflict with someone who is beyond that state of willingness to build on well-being. And they're someone who's already on the outside of a why that could be aligned or values that could be aligned. And so, we talk about this like this is the answer, the end all to be all. The truth is that there are going to be those people that this isn't going to resonate in the relationship that they're in, whether it's that particular employer, whether it's a particular boss, but there are people that this won't resonate with. And my feeling, and I'm curious what yours is, but my feeling is that it's a couple of things. It's damage that's been done that can't be undone, right? It's also, though, maybe some of the generational stuff that you've talked about, maybe neurodiversity, maybe other things, but also there is a real struggle to come to that vulnerability and that willingness to accept mistake and error and fault. And I don't love being wrong any more than anybody else or any less than anybody else, maybe. It's really hard. And I think that that's where quite often we see leaders who go, well, the well-being stuff is great, but I've given them everything and they're still not happy. They're still argumentative. Or I don't think that there's a perfect answer for that. I think that there are a couple of answers for that, usually. But I think it's okay to acknowledge that this isn't necessarily the answer for that situation or scenario. It might be, maybe.
It's not the easy answer.
No.
Let's put it that way. This journey through culture is not the easy answer. Control, firing, those are the easy answers, right? And we can't control another human being. We can only control us. And someone else's poor reaction to us is not a statement about us. Our reaction to that is a statement about us. And I think it's really important to note that hurt people, but healed people create healing spaces for people to heal. And that takes time. And you won't be able to do that for everyone.
No.
And that's where boundaries are needed. That's where communication and direct communication may be needed.
And unfortunately, policies and procedures.
That's why they exist. And preserving the dignity of the individual in question still matters. Fair treatment, respect, civility is not deserved. It's not something that I earn the right to be treated with civility or politeness or courtesy. And I think that's hard because, especially as leaders, and I think we're getting to a real tender spot here, when you're leaders, you take a lot of damage from people who don't understand the role that you play. And I think that's why our, coming full circle to what you opened this conversation with, owning our own thriving. It has to be me. I have to take care of me first and know how to give myself the rest I need, to give myself the protection and the boundaries I need, to advocate for what I need, to ask for the help and the support that I need, to have a boundary to say, no, this is not okay. And that's true no matter who we are. Safety and risk and thriving can happen. And recognizing that I have to do that first for myself.
I would agree wholeheartedly. And I think that important to do that, not with an eye of that comes at the cost to anyone else, but instead as how do we do this for ourselves, but together?
In service.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's always going to be a hard thing, but I think it's worthwhile conversation, but also worthwhile unpacking the parts that are the most icky and uncomfortable. Because if we reflect on the leaders who might be listening to this, or even just team members who might be listening to this, there's always going to be some who have differences of opinions somewhere along the line. But you're right. That doesn't mean that they're any less deserving of those respectful, human-centered communications and treatments.
And we need that difference of opinion.
Yeah, we do.
So how do we create safety around that? And I mean, so many tributaries to this incredible topic. And I think we're just starting to unpack it. And so
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to more conversations
Yeah,
around
me too.
this.
Me too. Well, I have enjoyed this conversation thoroughly, as every conversation we have, but I'm excited to do that, to unpack more of this and certainly unpack a lot of more of the pieces around this, because the complexity has really given us the fodder for so many conversations.
Yes.
And so hopefully our listeners are enjoying and appreciating some of these topics. And of course, we'd love to hear more. So please make sure that you're following us. Please make sure that you're on the lookout for next episode. We'll be very excited to welcome you in, and soon we will have another episode for you that maybe talks about some of these really interesting pieces of well-being.
I love it. And we would love to hear in the comments or wherever you are finding this episode. We would love to hear how something from this conversation helped you disrupt the dissonance in your workplace or maybe even within yourself. And we're really glad you're here. So thanks for joining us.
Take care.
Thanks for joining us on the Dissonance Disrupted podcast. We believe conversations don't end here, they begin here. If today sparked something for you, please take the time to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your network.
And if you want to connect with us about today's show, we would love to hear from you. Visit us at www.dissonancedisrupted.ca for show notes, contact information, and more. Be sure to bring your coffee and join us next time on the Dissonance Disrupted podcast. Chat soon.
Marketing and social media is done by Shaylin Wilson, editing by Evie Toddy, producing by Sherri Dockree, creative design and show notes by Nicki Straza. If you are interested in speaking with Nicki or Sherri about consulting or coaching for yourself or your organization, you can email Nicki directly via email at info@dissonancedisrupted.ca or Sherri directly via email at connect@dissonancedisrupted.ca.